So
Should I say my whole spiel again?
if you can do it,
I could,
yeah. Well, go ahead.
and then you can tell your whole spiel about lobsters.
Lobster spiel.
Uh,
What's the
well, what
short?
were you
What's the
saying?
short story here? Like, what you were sharing with me is money centric thinking isn't driving you because it
Well,
feels inauthentic.
okay,
Money centric, money first thinking is not driving you.
um, yeah. Basically, what I was saying is that I've been probably for the first time in my life, I've been like trying to sit with what feels right or just being more aware of what feels right. And I think it can come from a place of like, I don't like what I'm doing, like this job sucks, whatever, that kind of thing. And so I was basically saying that if we could talk about like the six-figure income coaches, I mentioned this when we had our last um actual recording, that I think regardless of what they can teach us and how they can help our business grow, there's definitely a marketing strategy there that doesn't sit right with me. Like at the core, they're saying like become a six-figure income coach, which to me is spreading like a scarcity mentality. Like, of course, I want to make money. Of course, like money is a wonderful thing to help me out and help anybody else out. However, bringing uh it's kind of like they're hitting a pain point, and that's what's going to get me to like jump and buy their services. And I think it's bullshit, and I think it's kind of an entire the if we look at society as a whole and the machine that we built and this kind of perpetual like constant production thing that we're in, that, as I was saying, doesn't honor seasons and the seasons that living things need to go through. It's just this machine, and it just goes and it goes and it goes. You have to work your 5 days a week. You have to, you know, work, like I said, in a freezing cold warehouse, fulfilling orders, whatever it is that you have to just keep doing, that it's not getting that person ahead in any way. Like I am that person. I'm barely making it. I hate my job. I hate the fact that I don't have barely enough money to pay my bills. Um, and yet I feel like stuck in this thing that, without being like, I I don't believe in any sort of way as this conspiratorial or whatever. I think the system is set up that you can't get ahead if you are if unless you have like some sort of great like idea or fall into money or whatever. Like it's stat I believe that I'm not saying like I'm not trying to be negative, but what I'm trying to say is that it's stacked against most people, because at its core is someone or some sort of group that runs some these organizations, these companies, and they stand to profit from all the hard work that everyone else is doing. And they're not going to change because they are living the cushy lives. They're sitting on their yachts. They're the ones that are like don't have these common worries that Most of us do. And then scanning it back even further, I question, what is the purpose of this, like, constant driving, this constant, like, progress, the betterment of humankind. It's fed to us that this is what we're doing, but it's BS. Now, that doesn't mean I'm blind to the fact that things in a lot of ways are better than they've ever been. That, you know, we have better technology, we have better medicine, we have, you know, a lot of, like, lot less people dying of disease and starvation and whatnot. However, we still need to go back at the core and see what is the driving force, and the driving force is money. And it's being used in an evil way, because it's not an evil thing, but that doesn't serve our species, our actual progress and you know, our whatever it is into the future that we actually should be focusing on. Because I don't believe that we are making the planet any better. I don't believe that the struggle it takes to get big companies to fall in line and recycle their wastes, the struggle it takes for laws to be passed for people to have their rights, the struggle it takes for, you know, the right thing to be done. It's again, it's stacked against us. We have, like, I don't believe I'm leaving a better world for my son. I believe we are leaving a disaster. And because of money, because of the not even the money, it's the people that want to hoard the money, and we're not actually able to make the changes that we actually can, because some people are going to be they're going to be uncomfortable when all they're used to is comfort. When the common people's comfort is almost like, it's not even comfort, it's a dulling of the senses, it's a numbing of the harsh reality that we're in. Like, let's like brainlessly watch TV, play games, drink, you know. So I'm coming from a place of, like, I don't feel like I'm a victim. I don't feel like the universe is a unfriendly place. I'm not coming from that perspective, but what I am coming from is, like, what I feel at my core feels right, and what doesn't feel right. And what I feel is at the core of this society, this culture that we live within. Because we could certainly do better. And unfortunately, I don't see people being held, or big companies being held accountable. And if they are held accountable, it's not enough to actually make a change. And I don't feel like any government is doing its job holding these large companies accountable, because I feel like the government itself is just another one of these organizations that at its core is keeping things the way they are right now. And so that's basically a more detailed version of what I was saying to you right before we started recording. And some of the insights were like, I don't feel like, and what the core of this conversation is about, where do I want to take coaching next? Where do I want to go? And I was talking to another coach saying, I don't feel motivated right now. And she expressed the idea of like the roses, they produce flowers, they bloom, whatever, but they're not doing it all the time. There's a moment of rest. And I feel like, and that's kind of where the conversation of like how we don't live in a society that allows for that rest. And also like I'm kind of personally going through that kind of a rest. Like I feel like through things like I just said, there's something that I can share, and that um it's brewing, but I also don't want to force it to come out. That it will come, it's like in its gestation period, and I need to, for the first time in my life, allow myself that space to be okay, to to exist within this space that feels uncomfortable for me, because I'm not actually what I perceive as doing something. I'm in a not doing stage, which is also a doing. And
Yeah.
so, and
Sometimes
then
not,
that just
and sometimes not knowing is a knowing. I think you alluded to that
right,
earlier when we were off camera.
right. And so the other thing that was brought up, just the last thing, was that I was saying something about like I didn't, oh, right, the moonshots guy. So I didn't feel like, I don't feel like I know enough to actually like come out to the world and be like and talk about things like that I had just talked about, because there's so many people that actually are know things, like they're very into politics and understand the political scene, know about law, or know about this, or know about that. But what I taking the step back again, I see people who know a lot about something get stuck in that. They get trapped in it. Whereas somebody who doesn't actually know a lot about certain specific things, but kind of has a sense of stuff, and kind of has like, is kind of more or less going off of like a curiosity, and what something just doesn't feel right. Like something's not functioning quite right. Like, is there a different way we can do it? Whereas that person is like, no, this is the way it is. This is how it works. It's the only way we can do it. Whatever it is. And then that person who's kind of coming with curiosity and not really knowing, but seeing that there's a problem, they're like kind of coming, they're from out here, kind of going, hey guys that are right here, what if we did it this way? Like, is it possible to restructure this thing like this? And then in those experts, if their minds are not closed, might see like, oh, maybe there is another way. And I was using the example of um, a guy named Naveen Jain, who wrote the book Moonshots, who he has enough money, he's an entrepreneur, to play in whatever field he wants to play in. And the idea of a moonshot is this idea that's so grand that it could touch the lives of at least 1 billion people. And it's a positive thing. It's like it's actually going to help the earth and help people. It's not just some pointless, useless thing that does nothing. That's just this driving that machine that is being driven like whatever. Anyway, the point being is that he was like using this example of thinking about rockets and how to get them into space, or to get whatever needs into space, and not using so much fuel, or having to carry so much weight. And he just kind of came in with this curiosity, and said, well, why can't we do it this way? What if this and that and whatever, like it worked this way? And it was actually a really good idea, and they were able to go with it. So anyway, that's everything I said. And then
Well,
Brian,
yeah,
all
well,
his
I'm
wisdom.
going to change things around.
Well, well, then Brian, with all his wisdom, told me this actually really incredible story about lobsters.
Yeah, well, let me circle back to the lobsters in a second. Because one of the things you said was sometimes knowledge can be a prison of sorts in terms of getting things done. And one of the areas that I think that may be extremely true in is like the medical model,
Hmm.
whether it's worldwide or not, but the American medical model in particular. So like if I grew up as a doctor, if I educated myself as a doctor, went to medical school, got my board certifications and all that stuff. So most of my training that exists around these things is what I learned in medical school, and some of that's got some pre-formatted learning or curricula attached to it. So I learn about the pharmaceutical model, I learn about the surgical model. So if somebody comes along and let's just say cancer, which is the kind of the big word that can be very challenging for people. Let's just say cancer is part of the model. I, as an oncologist, am going to be thinking chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, because that's the system I grew up in. And if you
Yeah.
don't do it the way I see it, then you're doomed. You should be doing what we're telling you to do. And even though inside that system, there's not a lot of data that shows huge success rates. There are some things that they're doing where success is getting better. But the medical model for treating cancer in particular has overall some tremendous failure, percentage-wise failure rates. And then if somebody comes along and goes, well, I've got this thing that seems to do a good job, but it's not part of that model, it's very likely to get shut down or poo-pooed or naysayed, or also very, very quickly based on the beliefs with that knowledge set, the paradigm of that person who may be the doctor or this in the particular focus here in their discussion. So what if, though, as an oncologist, I only go by what I've learned and don't look at anything new, then I'm a prisoner of my knowledge. I'm a prisoner of my beliefs that are attached to that knowledge. And one of the things, sidebar, one of the things I always tell people is test your beliefs all the time, because if you don't do it, then your beliefs aren't really based on truth. Your beliefs are based on comfort. All beliefs should be challenged, even my own. And sometimes I get stubbornly stuck to certain kinds of beliefs, but you should be willing to test your beliefs against all kinds of additional forms of information, not just the ones that confirm your beliefs. You should be willing to test your beliefs against the things that try to oppose your beliefs and still come back with an evaluation. Yep, I like my beliefs because I've done the research and I know these things to be not just comfortable for me, but I know that I've reinforced in my search by looking at non-conforming information that I am in fact very satisfied with my things. Whereas a lot of people are cynical enough to say, no, it's not in my beliefs, I'm not going to look at it. It's not in my beliefs, I'm not willing to look at it. I'll say that again, because this is a very common situation. It's called, it's not in my beliefs, so I'm not willing to look at it. And that's a form of cynicism of sorts. And the other thing is the conformance to belief. So you get confirmation bias. There's something called the cognitive dissonance, where it's actually painful to be wrong. So you will block out anything that seems to put you in touch with that pain point. And then the third thing is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. There are lots of other confirmation of biases in the process. There's like 25 different biases, but these are the big three. So Dunning-Kruger effect is where you're not smart enough to know you're not smart. Or you're too smart and think you're not smart enough. That's another challenge that does come up. So that's called the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Oh my God, there's still pee everywhere. One second. But this book, Think Again by Adam Grant. Is that right? Adam Grant?
Yep.
Talks all about that. And it's all about the idea of
here, why don't I pause this for a second? You take care of that.
yeah, well, let me clean this.
So we will forever call this the spilt tea event.
Well, yeah, I'm just glad I don't think it got on this outlet thing I got here.
Yeah.
But I mean, just what you're talking about, I've been reading this book
So,
and it's yeah, it's called Think Again, because the power of knowing what you don't know. So that, yeah, that reminded me, and it just talks about so many examples of like how believing a certain thing or being, knowing what you know has just backfired on people. And then other examples of how like there's these people they predict, they're like predictors of like events that are going to happen, like who's going to win an election and all that. It's like almost a contest. He also talks about um a black man who would bring curiosity and hold and have conversations with like KKK members and like,
oh, and I've seen that guy's story. He's amazing.
yeah, and like a few months later they're like hanging up the robe and getting their clans brothers to do
Yep.
the same. I
He
mean,
just
it's like,
he just
and
breaks
he's
bread
just
with
bringing
them.
curiosity.
He just breaks
What?
bread with them. He just has tea or coffee or a cake or what,
But it's
and
doing it
drips
by
love on
understanding.
them.
Yeah, yeah, but he's doing it by understanding, like bringing curiosity as to like their what what has caused you to feel the way you feel. Like it's just like it's very interesting. And then what it is it's that, I don't want to say technique, but it that kind of approach creates a kind of like comfortableness or whatever. And then he's able to say, when they're like perceptive now, he's able to like ask them, well, what about like, like throw in something like a new perspective. And then you kind of get these responses of that are like, oh, I've never really thought about it that way. Like they see the human in him, and they see like, oh, this person isn't the stereotype that I thought they were.
Right. Well, there is something in lying when it comes to these kinds of behaviors you're talking about, where somebody will step out and approach somebody who might normally be a terrifying opponent to a
Mhm.
situation. So if I was a black man and I'd been, exposed to, what I call the thousand cuts or or death by a thousand cuts type of thing, but I still reach out and go past my traumas and my fears and I engage people at this level. That's something. It's kind of embedded in this as a little bit of the Socratic method. So you're and I like to describe in many ways. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but that you heard me use the word cynicism before, which is you just don't want to know. You've made your decision, whether it's based on fear or anything else. You've made your decision. Not going to learn anything else. Not equipped to do it. In many ways, that could be another form of cognitive dissonance where I'm just like, it's too painful for me even question my beliefs or question my approach to things. This is just the way it is, and I'm not going to change anything. Then there's skepticism, which very often people equate skepticism with cynicism. But skepticism is more like the Socratic method. I'm not sure. I have to test this. I want to learn more. I have to so here's a perfect being a skeptic, that guy wearing a KKK, card carrying KKK guy is going to change. But I want to find out. So I lean in on this, whatever the case may be, establish a relationship with them. And instead of being conflict oriented or confrontational or, like my way is the right way or anything like that, but you end up changing people's journeys. And imagine how this conversation alone could change the kind of coaching you do. So few people have crossed into my coaching universe that I am very much opposed to some of their world viewpoints. But as we get a chance to explore some of these things, they start to realize a few things about themselves. I start to realize some things about my own prejudicial postures. Prejudging somebody is not a healthy framework. So So anyway, and that guy with the KKK thing is an extraordinary story. And there's another beautiful story, and I should dig it up for you. Um, it's a guy who is as bigoted as they can be. Someplace in Pennsylvania, if I'm not mistaken, this is where the story begins. His daughter became pregnant by a person of color, and he wanted nothing to do with that baby. He was furious at his daughter, wanted nothing to do with the baby. But that little baby, because the baby didn't know what it didn't know, and it didn't know what grandpa thought and believed. So that baby, as he grew a little older, warmed the heart of his bigoted, racist grandfather. Changed everything. Everything. To the point where that same bigoted man, I'm going to get tears talking about this because it's a beautiful story. That same bigoted, racist man, he and his wife later adopted 2 black teenagers. One became a cop in Pennsylvania, a state trooper, and I forget what the other story is. But imagine what kind of transition that is.
Yeah, that's a big
So,
one.
yeah. So, and it's all about not knowing what you don't know. It's all about questioning what you do know. It's all about being open to, like, okay, let me validate what I have rather than just confirm it. And building out this thing about curiosity is used. That's another word you used. This, the skeptic is willing to learn, a cynic is not. So skepticism is really a form of curiosity. You know what? That doesn't quite fit into it doesn't quite gel with what I know or believe or feel, but let's find out more. And imagine how much more progress we can make in society. So when you were questioning all these, getting corporations to change and getting government to be part of the healthy part of the process and all these other things, there are people too that get involved in government. There are people who own these corporations or buy stock in these corporations. Their motivations very often are selfish, self-interested, money oriented, and it kind of feeds this lack or limitations or resource issues, or it feeds that whole dialogue about things. But it just brings me to another point in the conversation. As you were talking, I was going, I'll get to the lobster thing. We'll get to that. So there was a philosopher, engineer, scientist named Buckminster Fuller.
Yeah.
Okay. So he didn't get to see it in his own lifetime, but he had kind of visualized that there would be this carbon. And the reason why he even came up with this, I don't know if he was an inventor, but he definitely was a strong proponent of the geodesic or geodosic, depending how you say it, dome. Very strong structure. The geodesic design is a very strong structure, which is why you'll see a lot of it when you need that kind of strength. Like if you go by, at least here in the Northeast, if you go by some of the salt storage facilities, they're geodesic structures. There may not be geodesic in terms of the actual bars you might see and things like that, but they're constructed as these domes because they can withstand winds and other kinds of damage, and you don't want that salt to get wet. Otherwise, it's a waste. You need the salt for treating roads and stuff in the Northeast here. So, but he also had designed this thing that became later called the buckyball, which is a geodesic dome in a sphere, like the sphere of that same design. And the carbon lattices inside the way carbon is built would allow that to exist. And it turns out its technical name is the Buckminster Fuller Rain. But in reality, that was actually found in nature after Bucky died, after Buckminster Fuller died. So, but anyway, that's a little side story. What's amazing about Buckminster Fuller was his philosophical point. Philosophical English is not my language, folks. I speak gibberish fluently if anybody ever wants to talk to me at that level. But anyway, philosophically, he had very powerful views about how humanity can transform from this lack, resource limitation, every man for himself kind of thinking. And we can all live in a very cooperative society and everybody gets what they want. There is no limitation when everybody cooperates, but there is limitation when there are enough players who are in that sink or swim, winner take all, every man for himself thinking. the reality, there are studies that show that when we live in a cooperative structure, that we all get more of what we want. We all get ahead together. If you live in the other model, then only certain people win. And that,
Well, that was,
go ahead.
yeah, I mean, that was kind of like the whole idea that I think Jacques Fresco from the Venus Project, he was that inventor who just recently passed away a few years back, and um he had come up with inventions that basically took care of any issue we have in our society. Um, and that was, they were all things that were able to be done with the technology we have today. However, I mean, they were like massive radical changes that needed to actually happen. And it was a society, like you said, where everyone can pursue whatever it is that they want to pursue, and it supported that.
Right. Well, Gene Roddenberry and the Star Trek platform was all about people all living in this kind of, you're not wanting for stuff from a resource perspective because you could literally create it.
Right, right.
And then the other part about it is that money does not change hands in the Star Trek Federation universe. And there's another TV show you had turned me on to called The Orville, and money was the same thing. There wasn't really a money thing. It was
Right.
your currency was who you were, not the money you had in your pocket. So whatever you do truly serve, it should be who you were in service. So you could still have adventure, you could still have all these other things, and that's the universe I think is unfolding for humanity, however slowly it's happening. I do believe we're heading for a cashless society at some point. I know for anybody who's out there listening, they can't envision it, that I'm probably just, their heads are exploding. But that's, but I do believe we're heading towards the point where we just don't need it. Like if you want to be on a yacht for a few days, just get on a yacht. You know what? I don't quite know how that's going to work out, because there are a lot of people think, well, how if I own the yacht, what am I going to get for your being on my yacht? But I think that what owning a yacht thing will kind of change, because
Yeah,
I can sort of see it happening. And I think younger people who are growing up with these TV shows are seeing it even better than I do. I'm old enough now because I grew up in this money centric first thinking world, that it's kind of easier to kind of go, I don't know how to make it work. So, you know, I'm not talking about communism. Anybody wants to get all upset about that, I'm not talking about communism, but also not talking about every man for himself. I don't think we all have to live in a cooperative thing. So getting back to this idea here, so the Buckminster Fuller had talked about kind of like, I have to, I'm sure I'm going to be not completely doing justice to his metaphors, but he had this idea is that there are sharks in the world. So he had this idea is there are fish, sharks, and dolphins. There may be other things, but just say those three categories. Sharks don't like the dolphins because the dolphins can hurt the sharks. But the dolphins aren't living like sharks. So, you know, and everybody's got to eat. So there's a little bit of this, a fish eat fish, a dolphin eat fish, sharks eat fish, sharks eat all kinds of other stuff. Sharks are super aggressive, sometimes to the point of, you know, whatever the case may be. I'm not sure if the analogies are completely accurate, and the metaphor is even completely being described the way he meant it. But the point he made is we should strive to be dolphins. So we're more stewards than we are owners.
Yeah, and I totally, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I mean, it's kind of this whole idea of like, I think there are always going to be sharks. However, we as a species cannot allow the sharks to win, because like if the sharks win and the planet is fucked, and then just everybody dies anyway because we can't sustain life, then then okay, in the grand scheme of things, what does that matter? If we are all just the same being, it could do it on other planets. It could figure itself out. It could live in whatever its existence is that doesn't have time, doesn't that none of this even matters because it's not real anyway. But as these like little like separate beings that we are, these supposedly these individuals, it's important for us to like change the way that we go about things and to do like good for the planet, do good for the people of the future, um, and do good for ourselves as a whole, not as specific individuals that deserve more than others do. We all deserve. And there's the massive rampant sickness in our society is because of our society and the way we are functioning. That is why there are people that are addicted to drugs. That is why there are people that commit horrendous crimes. That is why there are people who do not have homes. So what is the point of killing this planet, but meanwhile trying to get to an already dead planet like Mars, which I'm all for space travel. I think it's it's the most exciting thing ever.
Right.
But why try to bring a dead planet back to life and kill this one in the process?
Well, there's like you could say Elon Musk sees the need for us as humanity to build large million people plus colonies on Mars because we're screwing our environment here is among the thinking that the things he's thinking about. And I'm going, but it would be probably easier energetically, resource wise and everything, if we just solved the problems than if we had to relocate to Mars. Now there's something else to be said. It's like, meteor disaster might be benefit by us being split up a little bit across the solar system or the galaxy or whatever the case may be. And I think it's inevitable that we as a species will colonize, I would take the word colony out. That's not right word. We will migrate.
Of course.
Throughout the universe or the stars as time goes by, and it might take us 100,000 years to evolve. And there's some people who have these like classifications of where species are, where
type 1,
some
type 2
creatures
civilizations.
Type 2, type, and I think we're being described right now as type 3 or something like that, and
no,
type 4 will take another 1,000 years.
We're
lower.
Are you talking about the Kardashev scale?
I don't know if I've just heard people talking about it, so I'm speaking a little out of my depth here in this one.
Oh,
but I do know that
so
it's like 1,000 years to get to the next level, and then 100,000 to get to the next, and whatever the case may be.
That might be a different scale.
And what they're really doing is they're talking about combinations of awareness and technology that we would need to have as a species in order for us to accomplish certain things. And some of that is around speed of light considerations, time considerations, longevity considerations in our species in order for us to actually get to certain areas of migration around the galaxy. And then there's always this question is if we remain territorial, then when we're spreading around or migrating, we remain territorial.
Right.
Then what kind of conflicts are going to create if we do bump into other species who may or may not be interested in our territorialism? So, so it may make sense for us to solve the problems here before we start going out and carrying our problems forward into the universe or the galaxy or whatever. So
if we don't, we will fail because somebody will see us and realize that we're just a parasite and wipe us out.
Yeah.
It's
well, and there's always a possibility that we'll just take ourselves up in the process, because
Exactly.
this kind of thinking you and I are talking about is whether we as a society, as a culture, as a humanity can evolve. And some of it may require us to be looking at animals as sentient beings, even in our own journey. Forget about going to another planet and finding another creature. So does a cow have rights? Good question.
Right.
Does a plant or an insect have rights? You know what, where are the limitations on these things? Because, if there are such, where are the limitations, or where is the boundless possibilities? So when we were talking about when you were sharing with this whole thing about humanity in its condition and its current lock with certain kinds of failures, including environmental challenges that we've created, and now quite obviously we're facing climate changing, whether we like it or not. We're in the midst of climate change, and so
Yeah.
as a society, it doesn't mean that we've doomed the planet or doomed ourselves unless we keep on doing the same old, same old. So a part of our mission in our journey is to raise the vibration of who we are and raise the possibilities of how we think and engage, and and it can be very overwhelming. When I think about the idea that changing the energy of changing the course of people's lives, or for that matter, the course of humanity, it's not one person who can do it by themselves. But I will say massive change can be initiated by one person.
Mm-hmm.
So, in fact, I think Margaret Mead said, she was I think she's an anthropologist or whatever, but archaeologist, anthropologist. She also was a philosopher, so I think she wrote something to the effect of that never overestimate how a small group can really make a huge change. In fact,
Right.
the way she says it, in fact, nothing else ever has. Like large masses tend to become conformance oriented, whereas small people are the ones that bring change. Small groups of people bring change. So I don't have the quote down. I just paraphrased it terribly, I'm sure, but she did make a really powerful point that a small group of organized people with a desire to make change can not only make the change, but nothing else has ever done that. Small groups of people have always been the ones who made significant changes in the course of humanity. So, okay. So, and then when we're talking about money, I just wanted to sort of share as was, when you were talking about money, or people who are driven by, hey, 6-figure income in 60 days, whatever their promises they're doing. And then you think that they're living like fat cats. Many of them are not. Many of them are
Right. Yeah,
frauds.
that's pretty obvious.
So they take pictures of themselves with Lamborghinis that they are either borrowed or rented, but they don't have rent money or whatever the case may be. So some do, don't get me wrong. And that's a good thing. If you look at it from that perspective, from just that money thinking and the showmanship of money, or the showboating, so to speak, that shows up, those things who could be called rock stars are pretty rare. And some of them are very authentically able to help. I'm not a fan of Tony Robbins, but I will never disparage his ability to help bring change to certain kinds of people. And part of my challenge with some of these systems, and I'm not here to castigate or pigeonhole Tony Robbins in this area, but it's just, but so many of these systems, as they get going, they become money centric again.
Mm-hmm.
So inside of some of these platforms are like, here's our $600 3-day experience. Then when you're there, they want you to buy the $10,000 advanced coaching platform, which is done with somebody who grew up in the system. And then you go from there to the 25,000, which may be with the same person or somebody that they are under. And then in the end, if you really want to work with the person at the top of the thing, if you got $250,000, you can get a VIP experience for, whatever.
I see it all the time.
Right. So,
I mean,
but that
even,
sort of fosters the entire thing we're just talking about, is that it becomes about the money, with the underpinning is, I'm going to offer people change, but it's definitely about the money too. So what do we
Yeah.
do? So I was watching earlier today, in fact, I was watching this ad. I don't know how it crossed my path, but I'm always fascinated with how people do these things. So I watch this person. She goes, I do SEO so that it works.
Wait, say that
I can do
again
it better
because
than
you're
anybody else.
no. What?
So I'm
Say it
sorry.
again
I
because the
can
computer froze up.
I can show you how to do SEO, search engine optimization,
Oh,
right?
oh
So
yeah,
she's saying, I can show you how to do SEO so people can find you and buy your products and services. And my first thought is, what if the person isn't clear on what their products and services are,
yeah,
or aren't clear on how their products and services serve or solve problems? So there's a different kind of education that SEO training doesn't do. And here's the truth. It's the same truth for the people with the six-figure. You know what? Maybe you could teach me how to do this. I'm being royal me. Maybe somebody could teach somebody how to do six-figure income in 60 days, but they have to be ready for it. And most
yeah,
people aren't. So they're caught up in the trap of, oh, I can make six figures in 60 days. That'll solve all my problems. And then I can do what I do best. It's just giant gap based selling stuff. And it really frustrates me to watch those kinds of people doing those kinds of ads.
yeah.
So now the lobster.
The lobster.
How
I
are you?
want to.
Go
I
ahead.
want to send you. I'm going to send you if I remember, a video on the Kardashev scale, though. So that's basically what that looks at, is a society or a species' ability to produce power. So the
Okay.
scale
Yeah,
is
yeah,
by
yeah,
how,
yeah. But inside that power is your ability to move too. That's you're right.
right,
That's what
right. So I mean, that's where the idea of like, how much power can you harness? Are you powering the heart, this the full power of the sun? Are you harnessing the full power of the, what, like galaxy or solar system that you're in, that kind of thing? And in fact, um I saw a little article title that said the other day about like, are black holes just advanced civilizations way of collecting energy? And so but on the Kardashev scale, I think we're like at a 0.73,
okay.
something like that.
Yeah, I would be
we're
surprised.
not we're not actually a class or type 1 civilization yet.
Yeah, maybe for a while, maybe for a long time.
But you
So,
might have been talking about a completely different
no, no,
scale,
no, no, no. Now
because
that
there.
you say that, I just remember people talking about that the mobility, galactic or universal mobility was attached to how much power you had at your disposal. So I was making other kinds of linkages, and I did not have any recollection of the actual scale or where we were on that scale. I was just presuming certain kinds of things. So because we have barely been able to get off the planet, right?
Right.
So we're probably worse than even a 0.73 or whatever. It's probably 0.0073.
So
But
there's a, yeah, I'll send this to you. It's actually this is like,
was it the Dyson sphere?
yeah, that's part of it.
Freeman
So let
Dyson
me
had
just,
talked about this thing that you could surround a sun. Wasn't that like one of the levels, like level 1 or level 2?
yeah. And this actually, I think there was only like, on the original Kardashev scale, there was only a certain amount of levels, but the one I'm sending you is a more modern version of one, and it's I'll send it to you right now, but it goes up to level 7. It's about a 13-minute video. It's on YouTube if you just look up Kardashev scale. But I just texted it to you. But yeah, it's
Okay, I
it's
got it.
pretty cool. Like it's sort of like just one more quick note. There was a guy that did these little funny animation type things. That was imagining, they were it was, each dimension had its own little bit, and then there was also the movie where he took all of the little snippets and put it together, but it was imagining the 10th dimension. And it does it in a way that um it kind of explains what each dimension would be like in a way that could make sense to anybody who hears it. And then but it goes to this level that is like multi-dimensional, like and this Kardashev scale thing kind of does the same thing. Like when you get to those top ones, it's like it's so far out there and so beyond us
Right.
that it's almost impossible to imagine.
Well, it's also kind of challenging to even figure out, like, here we are, grains of sand in the journey that you're talking about. Maybe not even, maybe we're a molecule on the grain of sand, you know, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, in terms of that kind of development of the future, in terms of both time and knowledge and intellect and resources or resource utilization. Like, you know, we tend to be very exploitive in almost all those categories right now, and not necessarily looking at it from a humanity perspective for much of the time. And then the other question is, you know, depending on what we picture our lives to be about, do we come back? Are we here once and one and done? Is there anything for us after we're here? A lot of people don't have answers. Certainly, we can have belief in some of those things, but probably don't have a lot of way of testing the data until we go, and maybe come back. I don't know. And then who knows what this whole cycle is about. So the thing is there, I think, a lot of reasons why people are caught up in resource exploitation and every man for himself, and who cares about the pollution and all that stuff, is because they don't think very far past. They don't have really a lot of conversations with the possibilities.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
fair.
our job, or my job at least, you can decide what you want to do. I don't. But my job, I feel like, is creating the dialogue, the engagement, and the awareness to become part of a thriving humanity that may or may not go into the stars. But right now, to your point, there are a lot of people who live in the drama of the now, but not in a healthy, like, breathing in the moment type of thing, but more like, how do I get my next meal on the table? How do I make sure that guy doesn't get my cookies? You know, all that kind of thinking. So, so we were talking about, you probably already had a good enough description about how the rose needs to rest between its blooms. The plant needs to rest between its blooms. But I had this thing about, you know, I was watching YouTube shorts from this guy who is a main YouTube shorts.
Okay. Uh-huh.
Yeah, yeah, and this guy, and who knows what other platform he's on. Just see it on YouTube. So, because there's all kinds of shorts, right? So he's a lobster fisherman with a boat. I don't know. I think he has it's a big enough boat. He has a crew. I'm sure he has a crew, but he's the one who gets on camera, and if the lobster's too small, he gives it a fish and throws it back. If the lobster has roe, therefore it's, quote, pregnant, gives it a fish, puts it in his claw, throws it back. If the lobster is too big or too old, puts a fish in its claw, throws it back. And some of this is done by law. Some of, like, the bigger, you know, the females and the bigger, older lobsters are protected by law because whatever. So whatever the understanding of the lobster process. This one I just most recently saw, with the lobster was big and old and diseased and was no longer going to shed. It's in its last stages. It could live another few years in this state, but it's no longer going to grow bigger. It's done. He knew it from his experience. It was done. By law, though, he gave it. You don't. The law doesn't say give it a fish. That's his stick. He gives it a fish.
That's hilarious.
Grabs it with its claw, and then he throws it overboard. And they go back to the ocean floor. So anyway, what I was thinking about when I was watching this is kind of like, what is the analogy for some of our journeys? Some of us are smart enough not to get caught in the first place. Some of us are lucky enough to be in the right condition that we, even if caught, we get to go back. Some of us become food. You know,
Right.
some of us, and who knows, maybe becoming food could be an honor if we're serving humanity that way. If we look at humanity as the fisherman, um,
Okay.
so or the fisherman and his family and all the people he feeds with his business or whatever. But the point I was just making is that um, there is no hard, perfect answer for how we survive, but there is a perfect answer for how we decide we want to thrive. We may be at the mercy of some of the things, whether we crawl into a trap and get sucked up onto a boat and then get evaluated further after that, or um, but a lobster. The best part about this metaphor for me is that a lobster is at its core a lobster. It doesn't need to be a fish. Doesn't need to pretend to be a fisherman. And I think one of the most beautiful things we could do in our journeys is figure out what we are authentically. So, so whether we're a lobster or something else, but to be the best version of who we are, because it's trying to be everything else, trying to be other things for other people, trying to be something that we're not, is kind of an unhappy prison. I
Yeah,
don't know if
that's
that
true.
analogy or metaphor works, but
So it's all about being the best lobster you can be.
or whatever else you are, but being authentic. Maybe I'm the lobster, and maybe you're a pelican. You know,
Well, I agree. And I think there's the only way for us to be the best that we can be and to improve who we are being is by realizing and accepting who we are being and where we're at in the moment.
yep. I mean, that's the heavy lifting in our journeys. As you've probably heard the Dalai Lama quote, you see, the journey of your lifetime is from your head to your heart. So, in some sense, the reason why it's really important is in our head, we have pictures of what we're supposed to be, who we are, in our interpretation, all these other things. But in our heart, that's who we really are.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can guide more people from that head to their heart conversation as coaches, and they help other people in kind by how they show up or by the work that they do or whatever the case may be, we are indeed raising the vibration of humanity and slowly chipping away at these exploitive corporate interests and people who buy government and people who go into government for less than service reasons. Maybe that's to boost their ego, whatever they got to do. And you also, the other thing is that just thing I described is this a lot of the self-service stuff is to ego. It's not.
As to what?
It's to ego.
Uh-huh.
It's out of self-service. If I have to live a self-service life, that's kind of a fearful way to live. For me, that's a different kind of prison. I know there are plenty of people who live for the money and they don't know any better because it's their paradigm. And if you try to show them that that's not working, most of them will just like, "Are you nuts? Money is what buys you happiness."
Right.
Granted, having access to healthy amounts of money at a minimum, like so you put food on the table and your kids can go to school and you have a roof over your head and you can manage your illnesses when they come along and age in a quality way. So, but one does not have to be super rich to do that. So there is a discussion about how money can service happiness in terms of the bottom level, those hierarchies of sleep, sex, food, water, house, love, whatever. But at a certain point, money doesn't get you any happier. All the money in the
Right.
world doesn't necessarily make. So at a certain point, for those people who make acquiring wealth for the sake of wealth, they're probably not very happy people. I'm going to speculate, very unlikely to be happy people. There could be one or two along the way. Um, Elon Musk, we've talked about him a couple of times along the way. One of his reasons for achieving wealth, though, isn't purely on the exploitive level, is he's got this vision of living among 1 million other colonists and dying on Mars. It's driving him, or at least as far as we can see from what he's saying, it's driving him to do these remarkable things. And he's not a perfect person. He's got some ideas that aren't necessarily very healthy. And there are other things he does that I think are fantastic. I think that describes all of us.
No, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are trying to do good things. I just think that those people are also having to play in the arena that we've built. And I get that. We all have to play this game. However, I think that you know, if the core is rotten, we got to start there. And then the only way to start there is to start with ourselves. So what that means for me and how I'm going to serve people and how I'm going to, like, what are my next steps? I'm not sure at this point. I know
You're in the resting stage.
Yeah.
Or you're a lobster that's not in a trap.
Right. Well, I know you and I were gonna, I mean, it may not be worth recording, but you and I were gonna talk about and do some things. I don't know if we have the time today, but we should probably get together and discuss that stuff if you have ideas.
Okay. Well, do you feel better about this recording? By the way, our backgrounds are not consistent with the show backgrounds we've been picking.
Dave, you're getting me live from my my bed. I'm just chilling. I mean, I live in I live in a small studio. I mean, where I normally would be sitting is about 10 feet over there. So,
well, I sleep under the stars.
Yeah, quite literally.
I found a telescope today. I saw it. And it was an ad that I'm going to do some research because I'm seriously thinking about getting this telescope. It apparently has the ability to work in urbanish, suburban settings and remove the foreground light pollution that faces so many people who live in those conditions, and actually have an effectively unobscured view of things like Jupiter or galaxies that are 11 million light years away, or whatever the case may be. And I'm seriously thinking about spending the money on this thing. So
that would be cool.
Anyway, yeah, I just would hate it if it didn't work.
Well, yeah.
So
can you return it?
So I'm going to do some research. It does say 30 days, but I don't know. You know, some places will yell at any kind of promise, and then they go, wait, you have to do this, this, and this to make that happen. Did you test it here? Did you read the fine print? I don't want to get involved in that if I can avoid it. So I want to do some research.
Okay.
So why don't we wrap up the recording, and we'll run over our checklist for the other things we're going to do. So I don't know how, but I thought it was a fascinating conversation. So thanks for bringing it up.
I did too. I mean, we can just, I don't know if we should put this under Dead Guys Talking, but why not? Just because we don't have the banners up, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
You could put it up on yours too, since you got your banner up.
I could put it out there. Yeah. Okay. So until the next time we do a show, everybody keep well, and here we go.